Hi everyone, welcome back to Lonsdale Public Library's Book Chats. I'm Penny, and it is a new year, and with New Year's brings new book challenges. I love book challenges. I like being kind of guided into things to read without being told exactly what to read. That's why I don't do as well with book clubs or book groups, is because I don't always want to read the same book everybody else does. But maybe I signed up to do a book challenge that says read 10 cozy mysteries with cats in them, or read a book with a color in the title. I like that it gives me freedom to choose which books I want, but that it doesn't require me to read a specific book. And a challenge I came across last year was from the American Indian Library Association. It was called 2021 Read Native. And it was challenging the people that signed up for the challenge to read different styles of books that are written by Native authors or that detail a Native experience. There was a whole list of them. I didn't make it through the challenge. I enjoyed it so much, however, that I'm still continuing with it this year, even though it was only meant to be a one-year challenge, because I really have enjoyed reading about Native American culture and just all the different books that I never would have learned about except for this challenge. So I'd like to introduce you to some of them. The first one I would like to introduce you to is actually a picture book. It's called Fry Bread, A Native American Family Story by Kevin Noble Maillard from the Seminole Nation, Miccosukee Band, and illustrated by Juana Martinez Niel. First of all, I apologize for mispronouncing any of these names. They can be tricky. I did look them up. However, there were a lot of them that I needed to look up, and so my brain may not remember all of the pronunciations. I apologize in advance. However, fry bread, you may have heard of it. It's a really well-known Native American food. This book tells a story about how fry bread is not only a food that fills our bellies, but also through the making and eating and sharing of the fry bread, it's part of their family, their community. It connects people together. It illustrates how a food that wasn't supposed to be a food, it was created with government rations, it has turned into a cultural staple. And the illustrations are just gorgeous to show this. This is one of my favorites. Fry Bread is us. We are still here, elder and young, friend and neighbor. So it shows how everybody is involved. And this book has a rather long section in the back of author's notes. It explains why the author has chosen the words and the illustrations that he did. And there's actually some small symbolisms in a lot of the artwork. For example, a tattoo that you may not have noticed drawn on the father's arm and what it means. There's also a recipe for fry bread in the back. Although he is quick to point out that fry bread is a highly controversial food. Quoting the author, if there is one thing that all natives can agree upon about fry bread, it's that everyone else's version is wrong. In fact, the recipe in here uses cornmeal in it. I've never had fry bread with cornmeal before, so it's definitely a different version. He is from Oklahoma, so fry bread may look a little different there than it does up here. But it is a beautiful book to check out. The next book I'm jumping to is a young adult. Well, I have the young adult copy. There is also an adult nonfiction copy of this book called Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask by Anton Treuer. He's Ojibwe. He is actually a professor of the Ojibwe language at Bemidji State University. So he is a Minnesota guy. He grew up on the Leech Lake Reservation, and I believe he got his degree from Harvard. He is a big promoter of bringing back the culture and especially the language. And this book, as I said, this is the young adult version. We just got it in, so it should be out on the shelf in a day or two. It's a history book. It's a current events book. It's a cultures book. It's a language book. It's all wrapped up in one. And it really does have a lot of questions that you might not want to ask somebody in person. You might not want them to think that it's silly that you don't know the answer, or they may be questions that you might be afraid might hurt someone's feelings. This book does its best to describe things. There are topics in it like why are Indians so often imagined rather than understood? There are questions, why do Indians have long hair? How come everyone's laughing at a traditional Indian funeral? Funerals for us usually are sad times. So you may not feel comfortable asking someone why they're laughing at a funeral. But this book does a great job of explaining these. And as I said, there is an adult version as well. I haven't read both of them to see how similar or different they are. But it's definitely worth checking out, either version. And that was by Anton Treuer. His little brother, David Treuer, wrote a book called Rez Life. Let me tell you, this is not a happy book. It's a deep book. It's a gritty book. There's a lot going on. There are not a lot of easy answers for a lot of the questions that he poses in here. This covers his growing up. Both he and Anton grew up on the Leech Lake Reservation, where their mother was an Ojibwa tribal court judge. So he can also tell about other instances that he has seen growing up. And it's really a different experience to be growing up on a reservation than it is to be growing up, say, in a metro area or some other area. So it really is a great book to read to start to understand how things might be on the res. This book, one of the challenges was read a horror book written by a Native American. Horror is actually making a resurgence, I think. It is a hard genre to explain, but this book here is a suspenseful horror book by Stephen Graham Jones, who is Blackfoot. The darkness, there's an underlying darkness that builds throughout the book. It's not quite as intense as a suspenseful book, but it's there and you can feel it getting bigger and bigger until the end. And what it is tracked on an entity bent on revenge. No, not a person, an entity. These 4 American Indian childhood friends are helpless as the culture and traditions they left behind catch up to them in a violent and vengeful way. And it really does come to a head at the end. I'm not always a horror book fan. I did enjoy this book for the tradition and the culture that it brings in, but I was not a fan of sleeping at night afterwards, and I've got to admit I haven't looked at an elk the same since. That's all I'm saying. Another young adult book that I am super excited to point out, even though I haven't read it yet, is Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. She is Chippewa, and one of the things that makes me excited to read this book is because her tribe is from near where I grew up. So I'm familiar with the area very much, and she incorporates a lot of that into her book. So it's always a nice thing when you get to read that. 18-year-old Denise Fontaine has never quite fit in, both in her hometown and on the nearby Ojibwa reservation. She dreams of a fresh start at college, but then a tragedy strikes, so she ends up putting off going to college to take care of her mom. And she meets a new recruit on her brother's hockey team. And they become good friends, but something just doesn't seem quite right with him. Something's a little bit off. He's not quite who he seems. And so she discovers more about him when she witnesses a murder. And then she ends up being pulled into an FBI case on a lethal new drug, which happens to be meth. So, because she has traditional Ojibwa knowledge, she brings that to the investigation as well as the knowledge of the people around her and the tribe around her, and she has to figure out how to balance it. How she has to balance her tribal obligations with her obligations to the law. And I read that if you were a fan of Angie Thomas, who wrote The Hate U Give, that this is also very, very highly recommended. Very similar styles of books. Again, that conflict of the main female character on which side she goes with, knowing that no matter what, she's going to make people unhappy. So I am extremely excited to be looking forward to reading this book. I haven't yet, but I haven't checked out, so maybe I'll keep it and get a chance to read it now. And then we're moving on to some other books that I get really excited about. Cookbooks. I love cookbooks. And one that we have here, it's on our new shelf, is called The Good Berry Cookbook, Harvesting and Cooking Wild Rice and Other Wild Foods. It's by Tashia Hart, who belongs to the Red Lake tribe. And it's a cookbook and a storybook, as many cookbooks, especially now, are becoming. You can find recipes in here, a lot of recipes with wild rice. I thought these wild blueberry pan breads sound fantastic. And interspersed between all of the recipes, she will have, for example, the American history and the bison. So she'll talk a little bit about some other aspects, not only of history. When she's growing up, her parents were foragers, or probably are foragers, and so they would teach her all the plants and stuff that you could use in the cooking. I believe in here you also have fiddlehead ferns and other wild leeks that you might be able to find while foraging. I'm not as good at foraging those. I think I'll stick to the berry recipes. But these have beautiful pictures in them. Here's an avocado salad. This is not written for Minnesota specifically, as you learn from that. Avocados are not able to be foraged in Minnesota. But this is a Native American for the entire United States. And one more book I want to mention is The Sioux Chef's Indigenous Kitchen by Sean Sherman. The Sioux Chef is a play on words because in the French, Sioux, S-O-U-S, is under. So you're not the head chef, you are a step down or two. The Sioux Chef in this is S-I-O-U-X, referring to a Native American tribe. He is actually Oglala Lakota, and he has done so much for the Native American food scene for the past, I believe, 20 years. He has opened multiple restaurants. He was involved in a food truck in the Twin Cities, the Tatanka food truck. He opened up a new restaurant recently. I believe it's called Owamni. And just for the record, they're closed for the moment because of COVID. Keep an eye on their website if you're interested in going up. It is nothing but locally sourced indigenous foods. It looks fantastic. It's up in Minneapolis. And they've also created a lot of different organizations to get food to natives, as far as during COVID, they were packaging up meals, hundreds of meals kits, and giving them to the elders so that they were able to have food that they would normally have had. It's really, he seems like a really fantastic guy. His cookbooks look fabulous. I would highly recommend the Sioux Chef's Indigenous Kitchen as a cookbook. And that's all I've got for you today for books. Really quickly though, if you haven't heard, we have an escape room. We still have some openings. We have some openings on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So if you are interested, come sign up. It's going to be a lot of fun. Give us a call if you have any questions. Our phone number is 507-744-3977. And we will talk to you later. Have a great week.